Over the next few weeks, I'm going to respond to some of Dr. William Lane Craig's most popular arguments and assertions, and I'm going to begin with just a few that he's made regarding causation and creation. Now, Craig's piece de resistance is, of course, El-Ghazali's Kalam cosmological argument, and he presents it as follows.
Premise 1, whatever begins to exist has a cause of its beginning. Premise 2, the universe began to exist, from which it follows 3, therefore, the universe has a cause of its beginning.
However, more recently, Craig has been rebranding the first premise as to make it, in his words, more modest.
The first premise can be stated more modestly as 1 prime. If the universe began to exist, then the universe has a cause of its beginning. This more modest version of the first premise will enable us to avoid distractions about whether subatomic particles, which are the result of quantum decay processes, come into being without a cause.
Now, Craig acts as if this shift in premise is an act of modesty on his part as to avoid distractions. But I would argue, and indeed will within this video, that he makes this shift because he recognises that the quantum realm doesn't abide classical causation, and thus to save the argument he needs the universe to be treated as if it's strictly macroscopic. This is Causation and Creation, a reply to Dr. Craig.
Let me give 3 reasons in support of premise 1 prime. First, something cannot come from nothing. To claim that something can come into being from nothing is worse than magic. When a magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat, at least you've got the magician, not to mention the hat. But if you deny premise 1 prime, you've got to think that the whole universe just appeared at some point in the past for no reason whatsoever. But nobody sincerely believes that things, say a horse or an Eskimo village, can just pop into being without a cause.
It's quite often the case that when responding to theologians, such as Craig, I feel the need to interject after just about every sentence. As if the foundation is weak, so too will be the leaning tower that's built upon it. But I found that for clarity's sake, it's often more effective to show the whole segment and then respond one part at a time. And that's exactly what I'm going to do here. So, as you've just seen, Craig opens by saying,
something cannot come from nothing.
And since he's presenting a first cause argument, you might be tempted, like I was, to assume that he's making a statement about causation, that he's more eloquently saying, everything has a cause. However, his very next words call this interpretation into question.
To claim that something can come into being from nothing is worse than magic.
The reason being is subtle, but crucial, and it comes down to the term come into being. Being literally means existence. To be is to exist, and so to say that something has come into being is to say that something has begun to exist, that it's been created. Hence, unlike the first sentence, which is at least conceivably an assertion about causation, this second sentence is an assertion about creation. Now, to be clear, I'm not accusing Craig of any tricks here, but rather I'm making a subtle but crucial distinction which relates to the aforementioned distractions. While our intuition would have us believe that creation and classical causation are indisputably linked, quantum mechanics clearly demonstrates that they're not. In the classical, macroscopic world, we see one domino, event A, cause the fall of another domino, event B, but in the quantum realm, this isn't the case. For example, studies of quantum superposition, which is a fundamental principle of quantum mechanics, demonstrates that event A can cause event B can cause event A, and on occasion, both A and B can be completely independent. What's more, we see atoms both excited and not excited at the same time, which calls into question the law of non-contradiction, and we can even see them in 2 separate positions at the same time. Add to this quantum entanglement, quantum fluctuations, and other such quantum observations, and our beloved classical causation goes completely and utterly out the window. As Sean Carroll puts it,
At a fundamental microscopic level, all we can say is that there are patterns between events. The macroscopic human-scale concepts of cause and effect only emerge when you have larger collections of particles like humans.
And yet, despite the quantum realm violating classical causation, it hasn't been shown to violate the law of conservation of energy. Every atom is accounted for. Everything, so far as we know, is created from already existing material. Hence, we have some things, in fact billions of things, coming into being, that is, creatio ex materia, without a classical cause, and perhaps without even a cause at all. Thus, creation and causation are not two sides of the same coin, and it's a mistake to treat them as such. This isn't a distraction, it's a refutation.
When a magician pulls a rabbit out of a hat, at least you've got the magician, not to mention the hat. But if you deny premise 1 prime, you've got to think that the whole universe just appeared at some point in the past for no reason whatsoever.
Except no, we don't. First off, notice that this is a black and white fallacy. Craig would have you believe that either the universe has a cause or it just popped into existence for no reason whatsoever. But there's at least one more option, and that brings me to my second point. We could reject not only the cause claim of the premise, but also the existence claim. That is, we could claim that the universe never began to exist. It's always existed, in precisely the same way that Craig claims that his God never began to exist, but we can do so without his additional assumptions. Again, to be clear, I'm not accusing Craig of chicanery here, but rather making a point.
But nobody sincerely believes that things, say a horse or an Eskimo village, can just pop into being without a cause.
So, just the other night, I was in a hangout call with the actor and stupendously smart dude, Scott Clifton, as you do, and he expressed a criticism of Craig's apologetics that directly relates to what was just said. Sure, nobody sincerely believes that macroscopic things can just pop into existence without a cause, and for good reason. Our empirical observations and, more importantly, our objective, verifiable evidence clearly shows that when macroscopic things begin to exist, they do so via causation. However, and this was Scott's excellent point, the exact same objective, verifiable evidence equally shows that all new macroscopic things are comprised of material that already existed. Hence, Craig and his ilk are cherry-picking to the extreme. They're confidently asserting that macroscopic things are caused in the classical sense, and yet they're rejecting that all new macroscopic things are merely the rearrangement of already existing material. They're having their cake and binning it too. Anyhow, springboarding from this claim, Craig goes on to state the following.
If something can come into being from nothing, then it becomes inexplicable why just anything and everything doesn't come into being from nothing. Think about it. Why don't bicycles and Beethoven and root beer come into being out of nothing? Why is it only universes that can come into being from nothing? What makes nothingness so discriminatory?
Consider this. The United States is the richest country in the world. Therefore, everyone in the United States is rich. Now, this is most glaringly a non sequitur, but it's more accurately a fallacy of division, because it assumes that an attribute of the whole must also be true of some or all of its parts. Put simply, just because the United States, the whole, is rich, it doesn't follow that all of its citizens, the parts, are rich. Likewise, if the universe, the whole, came into being uncaused, it wouldn't follow that things within the universe, the parts, are uncaused. Hence, Craig is committing a fallacy of division when he says,
think about it. Why don't bicycles and Beethoven and root beer come into being out of nothing?
What's more, note that the universe isn't something, it's everything. And further still, though slightly already covered, note that classical cause and effect is predicated upon time. If there are no temporal states for A to cause B, then A simply can't cause B. To wrap up, I'd like to pour us all a huge glass of humble juice. That sounded better on paper. I want to emphasise that if the discoveries of the 20th century has taught us anything at all, it's how little we know, and it cautions us not to be so sure of ourselves. There is a reason why Newton's laws were called laws, and yet Einstein's theories called theories. Compared to our ancestors, we are not so sure of ourselves, and that is a good thing. that is humility. Now, theists don't typically like to admit this, because doing so jeopardizes their entire worldview, but the vast majority of physicists, who are, after all, the people who most understand these things, admit with full humility that we don't have all the answers. We don't know if the grand universe is eternal or if it had a beginning. But if you want to hear people confidently claim that we do know the answers, then look no further than the religious, for they start with their conclusion and work backwards. In this regard, they are the antithesis of science and an affront to honest, humble investigation. Case in point, be cautious of those who say they know, especially when they're trespassing upon fields in which they have no expertise.
But if you deny premise 1 prime, you've got to think that the whole universe just appeared at some point in the past for no reason whatsoever. If something can come into being from nothing, then it becomes inexplicable why just anything and everything doesn't come into being from nothing. Something cannot come from nothing.
To quote the acclaimed Stephen Hawking, there is a fundamental difference between religion, which is based on authority, and science, which is based on observation and reason. Science will win because it works. Anyhow, I'm Stephen Woodford, and as always, thank you kindly for the view, and an extra special thank you to my wonderful patrons and those of you who have supported the channel through other means. You, my fellow apes, are the cause of this channel's success. You are the gods to this creation. Thank you.